Welcome to the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast, where we dive deep into the intersection of career, family, and finances. Learn the mindsets, tips, and strategies to help you on your personal journey to build a life of abundance and purpose for you and your family. Now here's your host, Aaron Amin. Welcome back to another episode of the Hybrid Real Estate Professional Podcast. Today, we're going to air a guest appearance I did last October on the Wealth in Yourself podcast with Josh St. Laurent. Josh is a holistic financial advisor, real estate investor, and excellent podcast host. He put me in the interview seat this time. We dig into my origin story, and this episode gets pretty personal. I open up about my struggles with addiction and the dire state I was in before I made a turnaround in 2019. We touch on many other topics spanning from real estate investing, juggling full-time jobs, raising a family, and building a business. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Wealth in Yourself podcast, where we help people to design their ideal life and take control of their time and money. I'm your host, Josh St. Laurent. Today, we're joined by Aaron Amin. Aaron is a hybrid real estate professional, seamlessly blending multiple professional roles to thrive as a real estate investor. Alongside managing a full-time position at a consulting firm, he and his wife acquired 8 rental properties across 3 states in just 6 years, all while starting a family. He's the voice behind the Hybrid Real Estate Professional newsletter and podcast, offering insights from his expansive portfolio. Aaron is also a business coach working with professionals looking to build rental real estate portfolios. Now based in Houston, Texas, and expecting twins, Aaron continues to balance family, work, and real estate with finesse. Aaron, so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Definitely. So for anyone listening who isn't familiar with you and your work, can you tell us a little bit about you and your background and how you got to where you are today?
That intro summed it up pretty well, but yes, I'll run through it a bit. By day, I work as a business manager at a management consulting firm based out of the Seattle area. I live in Houston, Texas, though, so my position is fully remote. My wife and I have bought 8 rental properties over the last 6 years. Those are spread out across Washington, Nevada, and Iowa. We have a young daughter. She's about to turn 2, and then we have twins on the way. So I got a busy life at home. And I also spend a lot of time writing about my experience building the real estate portfolio and balancing it with the career and family. And I just recently launched a podcast on that same topic. I also work with a few clients as a business coach, helping people that are looking to get start in real estate. Specifically, my kind of perfect client is someone who is working full time. They have other things going on in life other than dropping everything and becoming real estate investors. They want to learn how to do it, build systems that allow them to continue to thrive in their career and balance their time such that they don't sacrifice time with their family. It's a little bit niche, but at the same time, it's essentially trying to help enable people who are in a position similar to where I was 5-6 years ago and help them maybe take a shorter path and avoid some of the mistakes that I made. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'm happy to dive into whatever direction you want to go.
I want to get into the systems and the time management, especially because you have so much going on. And I'm a big believer in building out systems that make your life easier. But I want to start from the top. And I'm curious, what spurred you getting into real estate? What was the decision or the conversation with your wife for that very first property?
It's a combination of factors. And I've always tried to pinpoint, like, what was the moment that made us switch from just making our standard 401k contributions out of our paycheck to trying to take a more active kind of control of where we're investing our money. And I don't have a singular moment, but what I will say is there's a few different things at play. One, my parents are real estate investors. They've invested since the early 2000s. So when I was growing up in the household, it was around me. I wouldn't say I paid a ton of attention to it, but I was exposed to it. I saw them ride the ups and downs. They own property in Southern California in the early 2000s, rode that all the way up. And actually, our whole family moved to Tennessee in 2007. And so they cashed out their California properties. It was 3 properties in California turned into 11 in Knoxville, Tennessee. But then, of course, that's where they were caught holding the bag when the recession hit. And so I did watch them go through this and come all the way back around. They ended up making it through that. They waited it out, were able to wait until their portfolio value stabilized, and they sold everything, not at a gain, but not at a loss. And then they actually rebuilt a portfolio in the last 7 or 8 years in Washington State, which is where they live now and where I lived up until about a month ago. So that was one factor. I watched their journey and took some inspiration from it. They were both very busy full-time professionals as well, balancing a family. So that is certainly where I drew the inspiration that it was possible to do these things in tandem. Real estate is this very kind of, it can be daunting if you look from the outside and think, oh, there's so much that goes into it. Buying a house, lots of paperwork, lots of money flying around, lots of headaches and hassle managing. So yeah, watching them go through that was helpful to see that it was possible. Now, how did we actually end up wanting to do it? So I worked the first 10 years of my professional career in the concerts industry. I learned so much. I had probably more fun than I should have had at a lot of times, but it was grueling. It was really exhausting. And the entertainment industry is very competitive and as such doesn't pay very well. For every junior level position, there's about 200 people that are willing to take that job if you step aside. So the way that industry works from a career pathing standpoint is you work as hard as you possibly can and grind it out and pray that some spot ahead of you opens up at some point. I wouldn't say I played my career perfectly there, but I did work very hard and I put a lot into my job. And ultimately, I was going to shows 3 or 4 nights a week and working my normal Monday through Friday office hours. And it was grueling. It took a tax. I had a pretty slow and steady decline with my mental health of like, was starting to burn out and I adopted some pretty unhealthy habits. I hit a bit of a bottom in 2019 and I actually did, I've been more open about this recently, but I did a short like inpatient rehab program for alcohol abuse. And that was like where I hit my low moment where motivation was at the lowest. I felt like I was in a dead end career. We were living in Vegas at the time, so that might explain the alcohol thing a little better. We weren't sure what was next. My wife and I had just recently been married. Our relationship was very strong. We knew we wanted to build a family together. It was hard. She worked in nonprofit and I was working this not particularly lucrative entertainment job. And so our financial futures felt very uncertain. So with that said, I recaptured quite a lot of energy coming out of that bottom and all that energy that I was previously misdirecting towards my vices and towards resentment, really. I turned it and I applied a new focus. And that focus for me ended up being laying the financial foundation for my family's future. So I took great pride in trying to chart out a path for us. We knew we wanted to have kids soon. I had gotten sober. That was a big step. I was determined that if I stayed in entertainment, I was going to find a way to make it work and have a better balance with mental health, but I wasn't going to bank on that. So we essentially decided we were going to build something for ourselves and for our family. And that's when the idea of real estate crept in. I started asking my parents about their path. Why did they choose to get into that when they were so busy? They worked in high tech. They worked at Microsoft and a few other tech companies, but they were always really busy. And so I started asking a lot of those questions like, what made you think this was worth it? How did you go about it? And ultimately, we decided we had bought a primary house in 2017, and we decided to buy a rental house down the street from us in the same neighborhood as a rental. We weren't reading books or going on forums, didn't know any other investors other than my parents. We learned by doing. We bought a house that was in great conditions. There was no rehab or anything like that. We bought it off the MLS, just about as straight ahead of the transaction as you possibly could. And then we used some of the templates that my parents had used to create leases. And then we marketed it on Zillow Rental Manager, got our first tenants. And then once we did that, I fell in love with the process of starting that business. Once that first rent check hit, it's not like we made thousands of dollars off of it, but just even seeing that, hey, there's a few $100 a month that are going to be coming in on top of the mortgage payment. It was just a really unique feeling. And it started giving that sense of fulfillment that we were building something for our family. So that's really how we got started.
That's an incredible story. There's so much goodness to pull from in there. I want to ask a two-part question. I'm curious, on one hand, what were some of the major lessons maybe you pulled from your parents that you're still using and applying? And then you and your wife have your own work backgrounds and skill sets. Can you talk also about maybe some of the skills that you learned along the way that help you now as a real estate investor?
Absolutely. So I'll tackle those in order. And the whole skill set thing is my writing niche too. So I love that topic. But so one thing in particular that my parents taught me is that they self-managed their entire portfolio in Tennessee. And that was 11 houses. They had vendors and contractors that they knew, but they really were at the helm there. And the majority of the rentals that they've owned, I think they've probably owned about 20, maybe 22 in total between all the different phases of their careers, but they self-manage those. And so that was another one of those things where by seeing someone else do it, it's possible. From the outside, if I was just coming in without that perspective, I would just immediately assume I need to hire a property manager. So by watching them and the systems that they set up, and yeah, there was anytime you self manage something, you're going to have to deal with some of the hassle. So like I saw some of those phone calls that they would take at dinner talking to a plumber or whatever, or like some of the conversations that would happen, but it didn't bother me. And that was another sign where I enjoyed learning how they ran this business that they had started. So observing that and getting the perspective of like really just this do it yourself mentality on the management side. Mom and my stepdad are both very willing to be hands on with their properties. Like they're okay with fixing stuff, and they're built the skill of doing a lot of those basic repairs. And that is very much not how I am. I generally outsource a lot of the repairs and stuff. It's just not my forte. Maybe it could be, but it's just one of those things where I've learned that my skills are probably better served elsewhere. So that's not necessarily something I got from them. But once again, I did see economically that by doing all their own repairs and all that, and by self-managing, they saved themselves a lot of money. So that's one thing. The whole story of them waiting through the recession and waiting until the values normalized instead of cutting bait and losing a bunch of money. That was a good lesson in patience. And I would say it reinforced the long-term thinking that is required to succeed in building generational level wealth. Seeing that firsthand, it's a little different than watching a stock portfolio go up and down. They both have the same root emotions, but I would say just the discipline of waiting that out definitely taught me something too. I was having a long conversation. My mom and I drove from Washington to Houston when I moved back in August. And I was having a long conversation with her about their whole real estate journey. And I was like, why didn't you give up? After you sold all the Tennessee houses, you made it out relatively unscathed. You obviously put a lot of time and energy into it, but you didn't lose money. Why did you start all over again in Washington? Same question I asked in the beginning, like what made that worth it to you? They both just retired this past year, well before retirement age. And that ultimately was their retirement plan, right? They planned it very intentionally. They accelerated some of the loans. They put some on 15-year notes. And so they optimized it such that this rental portfolio they bought in Washington would be paid off in time to completely fund their retirement. That's an amazing skill, not only in financial forecasting, but it's also just, it takes all the skills they built over 20 years of buying, managing, and operating a rental portfolio, and it just puts it all into practice. So obviously I drew a lot of inspiration just from watching that entire journey. As far as the skills that my wife and I both have that we leverage in our real estate journey, you would think there's not too many parallels between the concerts industry and estate, but there are probably more than you would think. So I worked in the booking office. So my official position, I started as booking assistant. Basically, I did all the contracting and paperwork for the booking office. And then I worked my way into an actual talent buyer position, which is basically a glorified way of saying booker. So the bookers are the ones that they call up the artist agent and they created the offer, they negotiate the deal. Agent says, hey, Red Hot Chili Peppers, are going on tour next year. We're taking offers in each market. Here's approximately what they want to make. Here's approximately what they want to price their tickets at. What can you do? We have to build out a map of every seat in the arena and scale it based on the prices that they wanted to have and work backwards into the money that they wanted to make and come up with an offer. So we essentially had to plot out every single seat in the arena and make sure that the math added up, that they could make what they want and we could net the amount of profit for the company that we needed to. And behind that, we had to estimate how much bar revenue, how much merch revenue, what are all these ancillary revenue streams that are going to come in on top of the ticket revenue that will ultimately comprise the majority of the company's profit. So even straight out of college, it was a pretty complex puzzle to solve. And so even when I was an assistant, I was mapping out all these arena level offer sheets and building out these maps. And it was just a really detail oriented job that taught you to live in and understand the numbers. And we were doing a couple hundred shows a year. So it's one of those volume games where you do enough of those that you become comfortable in the numbers and doing quick analysis. And I use the word offer over and over again because I want to say that's a big parallel in real estate, right? Usually it's a volume game. You got to put in a lot of offers. You got to know how to negotiate. And those skills were very present in my concerts career. And because I had learned that when COVID hit in 2020, the concerts industry pretty much shut down and it forced me to find a new job. I had two choices. I could sit around and wait and see if my job came back, or I could switch industries. And in Vegas, unemployment during COVID topped out at 26%. So it was almost double the national average. My wife and I decided we were going to move. that's how I ended up in the consulting industry. So I went to school in the Seattle area and most of my professional network was up there. Once I put some feelers out and started trying to understand what type of jobs would be available to me, that's how I ended up in the consulting industry. Now, my wife, on the other hand, she worked in nonprofit and she was a national program manager. So she worked for the nonprofit that was affiliated with the concert company I worked for. So they ran professional development programs for teenagers, so high school age kids looking to get into the music industry. So one thing that's cool about that is there was some synergy between our jobs. And at one point we actually sat at the desks right next to each other, completely unplanned, but that was the way it worked as we both climbed our respective career ladders there. But so she is very good at seeing programs through from top to bottom. They used to do career fairs. They would run all these workshops. So there were a couple where we would bring in these celebrity artists, like Santana was a resident at the House of Blues in Las Vegas. So he would come and do workshops or make appearances. She got this cool experience putting together programs, working particularly with those kind of school age kids and all that. General program manager skills. She was a good project manager as well. So we have partnered throughout our time booting up our rental business. I would say I probably am the more like in the driver's seat, but we do have a really great partnership overall. Like we always have a great dialogue, never make any big decisions without consulting each other, talking and thinking it through. And because we've implemented these kind of programs and systems in our careers, I think that helped us understand how to look at roadmaps and plans and make one for our family. So that was a long answer, but I hope I hit both your questions.
You did, definitely. I see this recurring pattern in people I've been talking to of the project and program management and how important that is across the spectrum, but especially things like real estate investing. Has that played a role in you, I'll say, investing remotely, right? Because your properties are spread out geographically. What's that been like? A different path than your parents. I think it's cool that you took them as inspiration and said, hey, this is possible, but I don't need to do it exactly the same way that you did. How have those project program management type skills played a part in managing properties across the nation?
Absolutely. So several ways. I would say adhering to deadlines, being able to scope things out and understand that in order to buy this property in this location and complete whatever minor touch-ups or if there's any rehab needed, you need X amount of money, you need X amount of time, you need X amount of people, and managing towards deadlines with a lot of moving pieces. It's a skill anyone can learn, but of course, if you already have that background from your career, you're going to be a lot better at executing those plans. So I would say a lot of people are great at that kind of visionary role. They know they can pick a strategy, they can commit to it. They're not afraid to have that move fast and break things mentality, which is great if you're trying to grow. That's a good way to scale. But I have very much like the operator's mind, and I'm more of that integrator personality where I am more comfortable when I can map things out and have a plan. And so it's interesting because I don't think my wife nor I are visionary personalities. I definitely have my moments of dreaming and looking ahead. And obviously, we wouldn't have been able to invest across 3 states and do all this stuff if we didn't have at least a little bit of courage to take those steps. We are like operators at heart. And so thinking along those project manager mindsets definitely allowed us to get things done. I would say just like working towards a deadline and holding yourself accountable, creating work back plans and knowing that if I want to get here in 45 days, like this is what I need to be doing today. Having that awareness. Sometimes people can wing it. That's great. Sometimes I wing it, but not very often. Usually I'm able to plot things out and know what I'm going to be doing and focusing on a daily or at a minimum on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Is there a bigger goal or vision that you guys are striving toward?
There always is. And I definitely am very cautious about using something like number of units. I really don't like that. There's a book that came out recently that I love and that I think everyone should read called The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor. It's by a gentleman named Chad Carson. It's on Bigger Pockets Publishing, but his whole philosophy is that you don't need to hyperscale. You don't need to go from 0 to 1,000 units. You don't need $100,000 a month in cash flow to be happy and feel wealthy. I believe the way he said it was aim for the fewest amount of units possible to achieve your financial goals. So he has even some philosophies of paying houses down even early, which is some real estate investors feel like that's blasphemous. A lot of real estate investors believe that you should leverage as much as you possibly can of other people's money and banks' money and scale as far and wide as you can. But there is something to be said for keeping it simpler. Like we self-manage the majority of our 8 property portfolio, but if we had 80, I don't think I could wrap my head around self-managing most of that. Like at some point you run into scaling issues. So to answer your question, like we're still looking to grow our portfolio, most likely by way of partnerships. So I, at this point, have gathered quite a bit of skill around how to operate. I know I've proven to myself the same things that my parents proved to themselves, which is that you can self-manage. It's possible. There's more technology and automations and things like that these days than they had in the early 2000s. Putting those to use, I think I can bring that type of operational value into a partnership. And I also know, generally speaking, how to look at deals and understand them. So if somebody has money that they want to bring into the table and they maybe want to learn, like I said, I'm also a business coach, right? So if somebody wanted to partner together on a deal and get that mentorship, that's an avenue that I'm more than happy to explore. And beyond that, the coaching, the nice thing about coaching is I can have some cash flow from that just by working with other investors and helping them get started. And if you think about it, your average rental property, the cash flow is going to be a couple $100 a month, probably for the first few years. It's not going to be anything huge unless you hold it for decades, which for us is the plan. But right now we're still in our first, 6 to 10 years of our timeline. But with the coaching, I can get a couple clients a month and produce even more cash flow than those rentals would. So I have those two levers that I'm pursuing. I would love to continue finding new real estate. I love the journey of it. I have fun with it. I like looking for real estate. I like doing deals. It's just something I enjoy. Not everyone enjoys it. And so that's the other thing is some partners might be like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to deal with that, but I want to return on my money. And so if I can find those people, I'm sure we can create some win scenarios. So I'm pretty open-minded. I don't necessarily have a benchmark of, okay, I want to get here. I do know that we want to continue to create a comfortable amount of cash flow that continues to alleviate the pressure on us, especially as we have 2 more kiddos on the way. And we want to keep ourselves from having to rely too heavily on either of our W-2s.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I really like the messaging around you don't need to be the next Grant Cardone, because I think that gets in a lot of people's way. I talk to a lot of people who are stuck. They want to get started in real estate, but they think they need 1,000 properties. I was having this conversation with a client last week and she bought 3 properties and now that's her retirement plan. She lives in the South. That's all she really needed. And it changed her whole life. And so I love that message. Talk to us about what you do in your coaching business, the systems that you teach. Don't give away all the secret sauce, of course, but what could people expect when working with you?
First of all, I do give away most of the information for free. I do write a newsletter. It goes out 3 times a week. And I have a lot of how-tos and I share a lot about the software that I use. I use the word automations and it sounds super flashy, right? You can't obviously automate your entire business, but you can automate things like rent collection. When you're marketing a unit, you can post to one site and have it syndicate out to several others. There's some software that allows you to even handle things like coordinating repairs. So there are a lot of systems you can put in place to remove the friction you would normally have if it was just you and your cell phone and your tenant and their cell phone. So the idea is to put a few buffers in between you and the tenant when you're self-managing. The coaching program in general, it's meant to be able to connect with someone who has no foundation in real estate whatsoever. You do ultimately need to have time that you can commit to it, but not that much time. I would say if somebody were to work with me, I have an offer out there right now that is 12 weeks. And I put a guarantee on it that if you work with me one-on-one for 12 weeks and you commit to the work that is part of that program, 5 hours or less per week, that I guarantee you'll have your next property under contract by the end of that 12 weeks, or I'll continue to work with you until you do. And so in that 12 weeks, we'll run through everything from why is real estate good? Why is it good for you as a working professional? How can you balance it in and make sure that it fits with the rest of your goals, both financially and lifestyle wise? So first of all, just really grounding on that and making sure it's something you want to do. The road mapping. So if forecasting out and showing if I buy 1 property this year, here's what it could potentially lead to. Maybe trying to understand someone's personal goals of do you want 100 houses or do you just want a handful that can set you up well for retirement? So doing that kind of calibration and individualizing the plan and helping people figure out like, where do you want to go? And then from there, doing that whole project manager thing where we create a work back and say, okay, to get from here to there, it starts with the first one. So the first thing we're going to do is get that first property under contract. And then we're going to put some systems in place based on how you want to scale. So if you only have 1 property and that's your only goal is to get 1 property, probably don't need to hire a team of VAs and set up a bunch of automations. Might not be necessary. But if you know that you're going to want to get to 10 units in 5 years, then I think it's good to build in and establish some of those systems in the first place. So all that is to say, it's the same outcome, regardless of what your longer term ambitions are, which is to get your first property under contract. But there are a number of ways to individualize that based on people's long term goals. And beyond the 12-week program, I also do work on shorter term engagements. So if somebody just has a problem or a scenario they want to work through, I'm happy to meet with them and coach them through that. I've even coached some people on how to leverage social media and work through online communities to build a network. That's something that I've been very fortunate to do a lot of over the years. And so that's another way to open doors. And if you're not going to have enough for a down payment for yourself and you want to get connected to potential partnership opportunities, I can help guide people on the approaches to do that. So a lot of options there.
A lot of options. No, that's amazing though. And I just want to clarify for someone listening who's, wow, this sounds really good. Your specialty or your experience really has been single families, small multi-families. If someone's listening and they're like, I want to buy my first RV park, your kind of space is single family, small multi-family. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. And thank you for calling that out. I'm in a couple masterminds and I am exposed to every sector of real estate, but I would not in good conscience take on a client wants to buy mobile home parks and get their first mobile home park under contract in 12 weeks. So that's a good call out. Single family, long-term rentals is where I built my foundation. I do know and am familiar with how to set up things like midterm rentals, which for those who don't know what that is, it's not an Airbnb. It's a lease usually between 30 days and 6 months. That's another lucrative strategy to get a little bit higher rents than you would on a long-term rental. So I can coach people through that too. But I try to stay in the lane of what I know and make sure I'm not trying to advise people on something I don't know about.
It's pretty incredible how many different spaces there are just within real estate and how many different specialties. Similar to financial planning, I have people who come to me with a very niche need and I'll refer them to someone else in my network. Do I have the expertise? Sure. Does someone have more? Absolutely. Because I'm sure there's lots of crossovers from single family or small multifamily investing to something like a mobile home park. So that's interesting. I'm glad we went there. I want to transition a little bit to time management. So you've got twins on the way, you've got a daughter, you've been building a family, you've moved a few times, right? How do you manage all the different things that you have going on? What does that time management strategy look like?
I heard a phrase recently that I really liked when it comes to balance, and it's very seasonal. There's different ups and downs, and there's periods of time where real estate is taking a ton of my time, and there's periods of time where it's taking almost none of my time. And so there's definitely no one size fits all time management strategy. But what I would say is I'm very diligent about carving out and time blocking the non-negotiable parts of my life. So for example, no matter what, from 6 to 8 p.m., if not hopefully 5 to 8 p.m., I'm eating dinner with my family, I'm spending time with my daughter, and I'm putting her to bed every night. That's something that I've done short of a few trips we've taken. I've put her down to bed every night for her whole life, which is almost 2 years now. And that's something that I will protect at all costs. So even if I'm having the busiest, craziest day at work and emergencies with the rentals, whatever it is, I still fight to protect that time because there's usually nothing that can't wait 2 hours. And I also get up with her and I have just a few of those protected family blocks because I feel like if I can't protect those, then I'm not living up to the values that I have said are important to me. And so once I establish those family blocks and I know and I can trust myself to protect them, then I know that the other time that I have available is either for working, whatever I need to be working on, or of course, taking care of myself too, right? You got to rest and recuperate, fitness and all that jazz, which is also seasonal, right? There are times where I've been really good about carving out an hour a day to go to the gym and being really diligent about that. And there are times where I've let that slip and spent that time working. But I think it all starts with those non-negotiable time blocks. I really truly believe that anytime I catch myself saying I don't have time for, I really do try and correct myself and say I am not making time for. There are only 24 hours in a day. So at some point, yeah, there isn't enough time for everything, but you do have a choice of which you prioritize. So I'll stop preaching now and I'll just say that I think once you understand that and you can set your own priorities and work backwards, then you start to find time for everything. And so I've had a few different, because I've moved a few times and we just moved time zones. That actually threw me off quite a bit. I had a pretty solid schedule when we were in Washington on Pacific time where I had a lot of focus time and I was really dialed in and it helped with my writing and creative work. And it helped if I needed to do any focus work around the real estate. And that got uprooted and pulled out when we moved to Central Time. So to be honest, I'm still trying to find my rhythm here. But the first thing I did was install those non-negotiable time blocks for the family, and the rest will fill in around that. Hopefully that makes sense. There's definitely some exercises that I do with people that I coach about how they can construct their time. You want it to be structured, but you don't want it to be so structured that you feel like you don't have room to be human. So there is a nuance there that every individual is going to just have to work out for themselves.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. I think the two main points that you said, start with what's most important, is huge. And it gets skipped so easily because you're trying to prioritize this big list of things. And it's easy to forget, if I don't block this out, that time is going to fly by without me even realizing it. And then just time blocking in general, whether it's a planner, an agenda, whatever it is, I think that made a massive difference in my own life. So I can definitely resonate with what you're saying. And I think it's the perfect segue into, what does living a wealthy life look like for you? Obviously, family is a component of that. What else?
I love the question. I think that wealth goes far beyond money, and it even goes far beyond time. Those are both very important components of what I consider to be holistic wealth. But I also believe the quality of your relationships with the people you love most are probably the highest currency of wealth. And in order to enrich those relationships, you don't even necessarily need money. You don't even necessarily need time. Of course, those two tools typically enable richer relationships. So I think those are the three components that I would focus on. But of course, I am very driven by money. I am very driven by trying to free up my time. There's a little bit of irony there in that you end up spending a ton of time to try and free up your time. I haven't quite cracked that one yet, but it all for me feels like it's moving towards the greater purpose of providing a comfortable life for my family so that we can enjoy the time we have together. I'm very keenly aware now that I have an almost 2-year-old and two more on the way, that these next 18 years are going to fly by faster than I'm going to be comfortable with. And so I really am trying to do everything I can now to remove that pressure that we have to work a W-2, so that if we decide that our quality of life and our relationships with our kids isn't where we want it to be, that we have the option to maybe take some time off or pivot, or maybe I can lean into the coaching, or we can string together enough real estate that we can pull that pressure off so we don't miss that golden window of opportunity while they're young. Because my worst fear would be that I work really hard for the next 10 years, and then kids are, when they're 10, they don't even want to see their parents anymore. They've moved on to their friends and all the other things that going on in their life. And that is one of my deepest fears, is missing that window. So my current definition of wealth would be making sure I have the opportunity to choose and invest in those relationships while I have the opportunity.
Yeah, I love that answer. It goes back to what you said before about putting like your family and what's most important to you first, right? And you described time and money as tools. And that was such a huge shift for me, like when learning that. It was like, oh, duh. But until you realize that, and the fact that money is infinite, right? But time is finite, and, prioritizing what's most important, I think is huge. So I love that answer. If you could give one message to someone working to gain financial freedom who isn't there yet, what would that message be?
Yeah, I believe that patience is an incredibly important part of the journey. And even real estate, which is ordinarily people consider, when you think of real estate investors, you think of super wealthy people who don't have to worry about anything. Even if you buy a rental property and you had enough money to put a down payment on it, it's not instant wealth. You're churning out, maybe if you're good at underwriting deals and you don't dig yourself into a hole, you're still only maybe producing a couple $100 a month in cash flow. Nobody's retiring off that. It takes a long time for these type of plans to play out. And even we're 6 years in, we've owned the majority of our rentals for at a minimum 3 years. And we're getting a good amount of cash flow, but not enough to live off of. And we're paying down our loans though. The houses are going up in value, and we do get some cash flow, and over time will do its thing. The rents will naturally increase with inflation. The loan balances will go down, and eventually they'll be paid off. So even though it's been a great move and it's helped us out some in the short term, the real benefits are going to come 20, 30 years from now. The same could be true even if you don't invest in real estate, even the stock market, right? If you do a $20 roundup every week from your paycheck, even if you're only making 40 grand a year, that still makes a huge difference. If you start doing that when you're 22 years old, you're going to be much further ahead than the person who waits until they're 35 to even start saving anything. With that said, it's never too late to start. I think there's always a path, and people like you Josh, are there to help people chart that path, right? No matter where they are in their journey. I would say patience is a big part. And even if you're ultra ambitious, I consider myself to be ambitious. And generally by nature, I am not patient. I've had to teach myself to be patient when pursuing this particular path I'm on.
I think it's so important for people to hear because there's so much of the opposite message out there, the get rich quick schemes out there that so many people fall victim to. I love the message of stay patient because it's the tried and true method too. There's so many examples of it out there of I slowly bought these properties over time. I set aside that $20 a paycheck and look at where I am now versus the get rich quick schemes. And we always hear about those stories and how they end up. I'm curious. So knowing what you know now, right? Having all this experience and knowledge, having gone down the path that you've gone down, if you had to start over, you only had $1,000, you're starting over, what would be the first thing you do with that money?
So there's so many ways I could take this, but I think what I would do, because $1,000 is a lot in some ways, but not a lot in others. I would invest in some sort of income producing marketable skill set. And so what can you do for $1,000? There are a lot of online courses that are very tailored to specific niche skills. So I'll just share, they're going to get a free plug here. One program I took that's under $1,000 is called Ship 30 for 30. And it's a writing program that I took. And the whole idea was that you write 30 pieces of content for 30 days, so one per day, and you take one idea and you write 250 words. You do that for 30 days. You build the muscle of writing. It has all sorts of benefits for retaining information, has secondary benefit of building an audience. It clarifies your focus. So not only is it a skill that can make you more marketable, but it's also really helping you process and understand your own goals and your own thoughts. And so that writing habit that I started in March of 2022, even though it was after I started my real estate investing, that parlayed into starting my newsletter, which parlayed into starting my coaching, which parlayed into starting my podcast. And it has this compounding effect where even if I didn't have any rentals and I didn't have any money, the attention and the networking, the social capital that you're able to build just by participating in kind of the online world and bringing a point of view forward, that to me is another form of kind of legacy building wealth just by participating in the online conversation. So I would have to say if I had nothing other than $1,000 and clear schedule to try and get back on a similar track of building wealth, I would say that's probably the course that I would spend it on.
I love that answer. And it's something that can be continuously built upon, right? Just like real estate. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So for someone listening who wants to know where to track you down online, where can they find you?
I am on just about every single social media platform, but my name is Aaron Amin. You can find me at aaronamin.com. My newsletter and podcast are both called The Hybrid Real Estate Professional. I am on Twitter as Aaron Amin and LinkedIn, Aaron Amin. You should be able to find me just about any site you log into. I do write my newsletter 3 times a week. There's a lot of good info in there. And if you go there, whether or not you subscribe, you can look through the archives and see I have a ton of how-tos about the software I use and the systems I built and some of the stories from my journey. So even if you just want to take a look, it's all there for you for free.
Awesome. Anything that you wished I asked you that I did not? Anything that you're just dying to talk about that where we didn't go today?
It's funny, we didn't talk about the fact that I still have a financial advisor and I view him as a valuable part of my team. I'll say one note on that, right? That because I have spent so much of my mental energy on real estate investing and continuing to progress in my career, I made a very conscious decision in 2022 that I didn't have the bandwidth and the energy to manage my stock part of my portfolio myself. I just knew that placing it in someone else's hands who has that knowledge base and is actively living in that world day by day was going to be a better decision for me. I made that decision and haven't looked back. I really appreciate the role that my advisor plays in my life. Josh, you and I offline had a great conversation a while back about the service that you have and you're putting together. And I really believe in the power of having a great team and people who can help you see your blind spots and make a plan, gut check you. For me, I'm very excitable. So sometimes I'll bring up a real estate deal that feels great to me, but it's ignoring another part of my plan that I just hadn't thought through. I really do believe in the power of having a financial advisor.
Yeah, I agree. The power of the team to me was eye-opening. Reading books like Who Not How, for me anyway, when I first got into advising real estate investing, I had this vision of I was going to do it all myself. And boy, does life teach you that lesson really quickly. You can't do it yourself. There's always someone who's going to know more, be able to do it faster and help you along your journey. So I think that's a great plug. All right. This has been the Wealth in Yourself podcast, where we help people to design their ideal life and take control of their time and money. Our guest today was Aaron Amin, real estate investor, dad, and business coach. Thanks for listening.